Good morning.
Good morning, Roberto.
Hi, Roberto.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Gordon.
Hi, good morning. Happy Hanukkah to everyone.
Happy Hanukkah. Good morning, Ronnie.
Good morning,
I
Rabbi.
assume Jerry's in the neighborhood.
He's went to get coffee, so he'll be here.
Is he bringing to me too?
If you can drink it virtually, I'd be happy to make you a cup.
Hey, just upload it, okay? Yeah. Hello, Karashes. Morning, Chris. Hi, Liz.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning.
Hello, Marcia.
Good morning, everyone.
Wow. We're here. Yeah.
Nice to see everyone. I was muted before.
Okay, here.
Yeah.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning,
Oh, good
everyone.
morning. Gabby, there's a friend for you.
This is Ari.
You can play
Oh.
virtually, yes.
It's a male friend.
Ooh.
It's a very safe way.
All right. You guys work that out on your own time, okay?
They can have play dates.
Yes, right.
Virtual play dates.
Y'all have a very fine time.
Mhm.
Go for it. Yeah. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We just started on the texts in this unit, and we are up to number 4. Okay. So this is from the book of Jubilees, one of those books that didn't quite make it into scripture, but it conveys some of the Jewish values of its time. And so when it talks about Shabbat, you can feel pretty confident that this was an opinion that was widely shared among, let's say, loyal, observant Jews in the 2nd century before the Common Era, meaning, in the Maccabean era. So what does this say? So quotes the commandment of Shabbat. 6 days will you work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God, etc., etc., etc. Let the man who does anything on it die. All right, that's harsh, but you see that in the Bible too. Right? Every man who will profane this day, whoever draws water on it which was not prepared for him on the 6th day, whoever lifts up anything that he will carry to take out of his tent or from his house, let him die. Just think about this while when you carry your keys out as you're on your way to shul on
Okay.
Shabbat morning.
Rabbi,
Yes.
when
That's right.
did the idea of an eruv so that you could carry outside your house, when was that developed?
A little bit later, but not so much. You have a lot of laws already developed in the time of the Mishnah, which is edited around the year 200 of the Common Era. So it probably goes back at least to the 1st century and possibly even before. So, the rabbis created that legal fiction, so you didn't have to worry about, carrying inappropriately on the Sabbath. Now, the last paragraph here, this is what I really want you to attend to. Any man who does work on it, or who goes on a journey, or who plows a field either at home or any other place, or who kindles a fire, or who rides on any animal, or who travels the sea in a boat, any man who slaughters or kills anything, or who slashes the throat of cattle or bird, or who snares any beast or bird or fish. And all of those things are, maintained within the tradition, right? You can find stuff all about those things in the Mishnah, right? Or whoever fasts, you're not supposed to fast on Shabbat, with one exception. What's the exception?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, right? Or makes war on the day of the Sabbath. Let the man who does any of these on the day of the Sabbath die.
Very harsh.
Okay, so that's very direct and very harsh. And that was the established rule in this period. Okay? And if it was dangerous, because you had military enemies like Antiochus, right? Didn't matter. Let the man who does any of these on the day of the Sabbath die. Right? So this is, as you can see, this is an expansion of the original biblical text about Shabbat, which we saw in text number 1, right? There's the rule as it's set out in the Torah. And here's the expansion from Jubilees, right? But that, I think, accurately reflects what was standard operating procedure among the Jews, let's say the observant Jews of Palestine in this time.
Okay,
Right?
Rabbi,
Yes, Marcia.
why was it so harsh? When you read the first, the original one, it was just, a prohibition, but it didn't carry with it that severe penalty of death.
That is true.
That's
However, you
weird.
do see other places in the Torah where that harshness exists. So, for instance, the story in the book of Numbers about the man who gathered sticks on Shabbat, right?
Mhm.
To me, even if it's a violation of Shabbat, to take a guy out and stone him because he gathered sticks on Shabbat, that's pretty tough, right? But there it is. And Moses says, that's the rule, and you are done. Now, why was the Torah this harsh, and why is the book of Jubilees this harsh? Well, there are two ways you can firmly establish a rule in the psyche of a person. One of them is positive benefits. The other one is
Negative.
the negative, right? The punishment you will receive if you don't abide by it.
That's my question.
Yes, Ronnie.
So that's my question. Who would perform the execution, so to speak? If you found someone breaking the law, whose responsibility is it then?
It's the community's responsibility, right? Now, obviously, we don't abide by these laws today, right? Yeah, there are laws about how to keep the Sabbath, but we don't stone people that don't do them, right? We after all, we don't live in a society that is run according to Jewish law. And even if we did, we probably wouldn't stone people that didn't go along with it.
Do you think that was the kind of view of other communities at the time? Either you do it or you die? Was that, like a universal view of other civilizations?
I'm sure it was common in other civilizations. This is, beyond my area of expertise. I'm sure it was common to use negative reinforcement for rules that didn't necessarily seem to have ethical content, but you wanted everybody to abide by them. Right? So either way, this was, this was the established law. Yes, Lou.
So the rabbis ultimately decided that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was not literal. What
Right.
about this?
We'll see about this as far as war is concerned, right? As far as the other things, some things the rabbis changed, some they did not. This was changed, the business about war, that was changed before rabbis came into being, right? And we're going to see exactly how that happened, right? Other questions or comments before we go on? All right, let's take a look at here it is. Let's take a look at the next text, all right? This is from Josephus. I assume you all have heard of Josephus. Jewish historian who survived the rebellion against Rome and whose history of the Jewish people was in many respects a response to Jew hatred among some of the Romans and Roman historians in particular. Okay, so here is here's his defense of Jewish practice, right? In that time. Although again, in the time of Josephus, this is no longer the practice, but he's writing about what was. And he mentions this Greek historian, Agatharchides, I hope I pronounced that right, who quotes this tale about the Jews and says, the people known as Jews who inhabit the most strongly fortified of cities, called by the natives Jerusalem, have a custom of abstaining from work every seventh day. On those occasions, they neither bear arms nor take any agricultural operations in hand, nor engage in any other form of public service, but pray with outstretched hands in the temples until the evening. Consequently, because the inhabitants, instead of protecting their city, persevered in their folly, Ptolemy, son of Lagus, was allowed to enter with his army. The country was thus given over to a cruel master, and the defect of a practice enjoined by law was exposed, right? So whether that is actually accurate, not clear, but that's what this Greek historian says, and Josephus comments. Says, Agatharchides finds such conduct ridiculous. Yeah, the idea that you wouldn't fight to defend your city on the Sabbath. Dispassionate critics will consider it a grand and highly meritorious fact that there are men who consistently care more for the observance of their laws and for their religion than for their own lives and their country's fate. That's Josephus's comment, right? And again, that's in a time when they no longer follow that law as far as war. Right? So you can see how Josephus differs from the Greek philosopher and historian that he quotes. What do you think about his last sentence here? His defense of the Jews who chose not to fight on Shabbat.
Sounds to me very empathetic. I mean, it's like he's on the Jews' side. course, he's Jewish, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's empathetic, right? What else?
Noble, I guess I should say.
He's saying that they are indeed noble for being willing to do that, right? And yet, even so, this is a time, he's writing in a time when they no longer follow that. Okay. Lou.
Regarding the reference to Ptolemy, son of Lagus,
Yes.
a quick internet search reveals that he was a general for Alexander the Great. So this is a couple of hundred years before the Maccabees and
Yes.
Antiochus. And I remember as a kid in Sunday school reading a story where when Alexander came to Jerusalem, that the Kohen Gadol allowed him to enter. I don't remember anything about Shabbat being involved in that.
Yes, and that's why this, as a historical piece, is somewhat questionable. Right? We also know that the Jews, almost certainly did not intend to resist Alexander. It was a matter of, how you managed with the most powerful army around at that time. And, would you have fought against them anyway? So they approached Alexander, according to some accounts, and they said, how do you propose to treat the Jews and their laws? And so out of that, Alexander apparently took the position that, he was happy to have the Jews as, subservient, and, he would allow them to maintain their own traditions and their own religion. Yes, Ronnie.
Hasn't it always been Jewish practice that if your life is in jeopardy, you can break Shabbat? In other words, go to the hospital, whatever. Wouldn't that be the same case as war?
The answer to your question is it wasn't always that way.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah. Now, as far as other things are concerned, maybe it was. I mean, I don't think they had hospitals exactly back
But you know what I'm saying.
But yes, pikuach nefesh, saving a life,
Right,
was, a high priority. But as far as making war,
but that
it
would be
didn't apply there.
saving lives.
Yes, it would. But that came later.
Okay.
Okay. Other comments, questions, observations? Okay, let's go to our next text. Right, and this is from the book of First Maccabees, right, which is written just, it's a history book. It may not be entirely accurate, but it's written not that long after the events of the Maccabean War. Right? So, and it does show sympathy for the those who resisted Antiochus, but as you see here, not all Jews felt that way. Okay? Meaning that the war against Antiochus was really more of a civil war than anything else. Right? And that's one thing that you should understand. And it's good to remember also while you're celebrating Hanukkah that, even though we talk about Antiochus and the Hellenists, that really there were a lot of Jewish Hellenists. And they are primarily the ones that this war was directed at. Right? So here's what it says. At that time, many went down to dwell in the desert, seeking justice and vindication, they and their children and their wives and their cattle, hard pressed by the persecutions. A report came to the king's men and to the forces in Jerusalem, the city of David, that men who had violated the command of the king had gone down to the hiding places in the desert. With a large force, they pursued them, and on coming upon them, they encamped and formed in battle line against them on the Sabbath day, saying to them, "Come out to us and obey the word of the king, and we shall let you live." And they replied, "We shall neither come out nor obey the word of the king to profane the Sabbath day." Accordingly, they advanced quickly upon them in battle formation, but the Jews neither reacted to them, nor hurled a stone at them, nor blocked the entrances to their hiding places, saying, "Let us all die in our innocence. Heaven and earth bear witness over us that you condemn us unjustly." And they attacked them in battle formation on the Sabbath. So they were killed with their wives, their children, their cattle, the number of 1,000 human beings.
Hmm.
Okay. So, that's exactly what happened to some of the loyalist Jews. Right?
To me, it's pretty obvious this is an unsustainable strategy for survival.
Yes. Right. Right.
Kind of reminds me, I don't know if this is true, but the Essenes or some group back then. There are certain religious groups throughout history that did not, that sex was something you never did. And so they died out very quickly. They didn't reproduce, And this kind of
Right.
reminds me about this. I mean, it's
Right.
like
The
so obvious.
Essenes, who are by many historians associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls, are
The Essene.
a group that believed in celibacy,
Mhm.
not just for the clergy, but for everybody. Right? You see the future of this group, don't you?
Mhm.
Right? It's pretty much like maybe not as violent as the future of these loyalists, but not a good future either. Right? Okay. Enough said, yes? All right.
I'm sorry. It seems to me like this strategy, though, I mean, seriously, it couldn't have been around for very long. Maybe it was a historical fact at some point, but a society's not going to live that way for very long in,
Right, yeah.
ancient Middle East.
Clearly, it's around in this time, in the Maccabean era, because it says 1,000 people followed it. That was.
But it wasn't universal then.
Well, we'll see. It may have been felt universally that was the ideal. You should be willing to die for the Sabbath. But as you said, it's not a sustainable strategy. So what happens here? Let's see. When the news reached Mattathias and his friends, they were deeply grieved over the victim's fate. They said to one another, "If we all do as our brothers have done and do not fight against the Gentiles for our lives and our laws, they're going to wipe us out." So on that day, they decided, if they come to fight us on Shabbat, we will fight back. Okay? So there you are. They decided, Daniel, just as you said, it's not a sustainable strategy. And so we have to do it. Later on, by the way, the rabbis would come up with a scriptural verse to justify this. It's a verse in the Psalms, which, I mean, we may see it later, but I think it's appropriate to mention here. The verse says, Eit la'asot lashem heferu Toratecha. It is a time to work for God because they are violating your Torah. They are attacking your Torah. Okay? So in other words, in a time when the Torah is being attacked, you can make exceptions to the rules. And that's what they did. Okay? Yes, Lou.
In the Maccabee times, during that rebellion, did they engage in proactive battles or only defensive battles?
Only defensive battles as far as we know, but let's hold off a little bit on that. Okay? And that clearly was the ideal. He doesn't say we will just, we'll go out against them on Shabbat. He says, if anyone comes against us on Shabbat, we will fight them. Okay? All right. Next, number 7. Back to Josephus. Okay? The only refuge then left to you Jews is divine assistance, meaning if you were not going to fight on Shabbat, only God could help you. Okay? But even this is on the side of the Romans, for without God's aid, so vast an empire could never have been built up. If you observe your Sabbath customs and refuse to take any action on that day, you will undoubtedly be easily defeated, as were your forefathers by Pompey, who pressed the siege most vigorously on the days when the besieged remained inactive. If, on the contrary, you transgress the law of your ancestors, I fail to see what further object you will have for hostilities, since your one aim is to preserve inviolate all the institutions of your fathers. How could you invoke the aid of the deity after deliberately omitting to pay him the service which you owe him? Okay, so this is an argument that probably was presented in the time of the Maccabees. You say, Mattathias, what are you going to do? Aren't you, isn't your desire to maintain all the institutions of Judaism, including the, total observance of Shabbat? So if you give that up, how can you ask God for help when you're giving up on his law as you understand it? All right. So, that's
A conundrum.
yes, it is. It's an argument that is made, and this is an excerpt from a speech given by Herod Agrippa, who was appointed by the Romans to rule over Jewish territory, right? And he wants to discourage them from revolting against Rome. And he says, maybe God is on the side of the Romans, or maybe, you don't really have a chance, but you're going to call on God for help if you are giving up on God's law as you understand it. So that's the dilemma he poses to the Jews. Right? And if you look back at the piece we saw from Deuteronomy last week, okay, right? The some of the assumptions in this text are the assumptions that Agrippa is calling upon. So, for instance, just to say, the Lord your God who brought you from the land of Egypt is with you. All right. It is the Lord your God who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy to bring you victory. All right. But, the assumption is that's because you're faithful to the law. If you're going to give up on the law, Agrippa says, that's, and then you're going to expect God to support you. So that's the problem he poses in trying to persuade the Jews not to rebel against Rome. Comments or questions up to here?
I have a question, Rabbi.
Please.
Are there discussions similar to this about other holidays, such as Yom Kippur?
About
not going to battle or all the things you shouldn't do, but especially about defending yourself?
There are later, but we don't have, a whole literature of how the Jews debated the laws in the time of the Maccabees, right? That only begins in the first century. The schools of Hillel and Shammai and their teachings are, along with some of the later teachers, those teachings are recorded in the Mishnah, right? But, we don't have a record of what most Jewish authorities taught, whatever scribes or judges, whatever authorities they had. We don't have a record of what they taught in the period of the Maccabean era, either before or after. Yes, Lou.
So I guess we should assume that in the period of Joshua and Judges, all of the battles that took place were not on Shabbat, and that since there's no reference in Scripture to being attacked on Shabbat, that it probably didn't happen?
I wouldn't make that assumption. I would assume that some development may have taken place in the law between the time of Joshua, so we're talking about maybe close, over 1,000 years before the Maccabean era. So, the laws of the Torah may not even have been written down in the time of Joshua. So I don't assume that. The account of the battles, it may have been that the battles for Canaan, the Battle of Jericho and so on and so forth, all those places, it may just have been, this is what we got to do in order to conquer the land. And we're not going to sit around and wait for them to counterattack us on our holy day. Yes, Daniel.
So in 70 CE in Jerusalem, what was the policy?
The policy they decided on was they were going to be willing to fight whenever, whatever they had to.
I guess I'm getting confused in the timeline here, because the Maccabees were what, another 100 years after that?
No,
And they seem to be.
Maccabees, the Maccabean War is around 165 before the Common Era. Okay, so that is almost 2.5 centuries.
Okay, of course.
Before the Roman War.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed with that mistake. I was only 300 years off, so.
Yeah, just the detail, right?
Okay,
So,
thank you. So someplace between Judges and Maccabees, things started changing, I think is what you're saying.
Well, I think it's safe to say that, yes, there were some changes. At least we can't assume that they abided by this rule in the battles for Canaan.
Okay, but by the fall of the Second Temple, clearly we saw keeping that from happening was worth fighting for on Shabbat.
Yes, yes.
Gotcha. Thank
That
you.
was essentially the action of Mattathias and the Maccabees established a precedent, and everybody followed that afterwards. But we'll see more about that. Okay? Other comments or questions before we go forward? All right, let's go on to Second Maccabees. Second Maccabees, slightly later than First Maccabees, even though it contains much of the same material, it is written a little bit later. So here's, this piece about the defeat and death of one of Antiochus's generals. Right? Nicanor, on learning that Judas and his men were in the region of Samaria, plotted to take advantage of their Shabbat to attack them when he could do so in perfect safety. But the Jews who were forced to accompany him said, "Do not perpetrate so savage and barbarous a massacre, but give due respect to the day that has been preeminently honored with sanctification by him who sees all." And the high sinner asked to reply, "Is he who gave the command to keep the Sabbath day master in heaven?" When they answered, "It is the living Lord himself, the master in heaven, who has given the order to observe the Sabbath day." Nicanor said, "I too, who give the command to take up arms and carry out the king's orders, am master on earth." Of course, even so, he did not succeed, right? Why did he not succeed? Because the Maccabees were going to defend themselves, even though many Jews tried to persuade this general not to do what he was going to do. Mm-hmm. So what's the justification that is given here for the Jews being willing to die? What's the justification that's given for those Jews? It says, God made the day holy, and that's the way it is. Right? And this is the God he's given us the law. And what else can we do? Right? So he says, well, I have a law of my own. I'm the general. I'm the master here on earth. God may want what he wants in heaven, but I'm going to attack. Right? And that's that. Right?
Rabbi,
Yes.
question on, so that last sentence, even so he did not succeed in carrying out his cruel intention. Does that mean that he attacked and was defeated, or does it mean he decided not to attack?
It means he decided to attack and they fought him off. Right? Now, but you can see this position expressed by the Jews who were being forced to accompany him as a critique of the Maccabees' decision to fight on Shabbat. So, here, you have these Jews who are being forced to accompany this general, and presumably they are Jews who've been taken captive or whatever, but they are loyalist Jews. They want to keep the Shabbat, and they're being forced into supporting the the Hellenists on Shabbat. Yes, Lou.
You mentioned earlier that this was as much a civil war as it was a war between the Seleucid Empire and the Jews. If that's the case, were there Jews who supported Nicanor
Yes.
and voluntarily were willing to fight in his army?
Yes, absolutely. And certainly Antiochus provided the soldiers and the generals, but there were Jews who, supported him and who fought with him. Yes, Gordon.
Did any of these wars last for more than 6 days?
The ones where Mattathias fought back, yes, they did.
So if we
You're
didn't
probably
fight back,
aware, Mattathias basically fought guerrilla warfare. Right? And it was a lengthy campaign.
but in the other wars, if we didn't fight back on Shabbat, that would end the war that day?
That would pretty much end things, yes.
Okay.
Now, how many such wars there were before then? We don't know, but at least at this point in Jewish history, there was a commonly accepted doctrine that they would not fight on Shabbat. Until Mattathias comes along and says, well, we have to, right? And that brings us to the next text, right? Another piece from 2nd Maccabees, right? So here he says, other Jews hastily assembled nearby in the caves to observe the Sabbath in secret. On being denounced to Philip, companion to Antiochus, they were all burned to death because they refrained from defending themselves out of respect for the holiest of days. I beg the readers of my book not to be disheartened by the calamities, but to bear in mind that chastisements come not in order to destroy our race, but in order to teach it. If the ungodly among us are not left long to themselves, but speedily incur punishment, it is a sign of God's great goodness to us. With the other nations, the Lord waits patiently, staying their punishment until they reach the full measure of their sins. Quite otherwise is his decree for us, in order that he should not have to punish us after we have come to the complete measure of our sins. Now, this piece is about how Jews dealt with the problem theologically, the problem of having to die for the Shabbat. Okay? And the theological justification that is given here is something that, it later on becomes kind of a time-honored maneuver among the rabbis and other theologians over the years. It says, well, yes, the Jews, have their sins, but because they are basically righteous, they get their reward in the world to come immediately after death. Whatever punishment they have for their sins is, it's accounted for in their death. Whereas everybody else, with all the other nations, God waits to punish them until they reach the full measure of their sins, and then they get their punishment in the world to come. Whereas we, the Jews, we get our reward in the world to come right away. That's the theological position which probably many of the loyalist Jews took in being willing to die for the Shabbat. Now, we don't have to agree with that. We just have to recognize that that's probably how many of them justified what they were doing, being willing to die, even if they all died. That they would be rewarded for their loyalty in the next world. Comments or questions? All right. Let's go on to number 10. Okay. So these next two sources, they're not directly about warfare on Shabbat, but they show how this dispute reflects another question about how they should respond to religious oppression. So you'll see here a piece from First Maccabees about the reaction of Mattathias. In the next one, you'll see the response of Eliezer. Okay? So here's First Maccabees. The king's official in charge of enforcing apostasy came to the town of Modin to make them sacrifice to the king. Many Israelites came up to meet them, and Mattathias and his sons were brought into the gathering. The king's officials addressed him as follows: "You are a respected, distinguished leader in this town, supported by sons and kinsmen. Be a good guy. Be the first to come forward and do what all the Gentiles have done, as well as the people of Judah, those who've been allowed to remain in Jerusalem, and in return, you and your sons will be raised to the rank of friends of the king. You and your sons will be honored by grants of silver and gold and many gifts." And what does Mattathias say? No, not doing that. Even if all the Gentiles under the king's rule listen to his order to depart from the religion of their fathers and choose to obey his commands, I and my sons and my kinsmen, we will follow the covenant of our fathers. Far be it from us to desert the Torah and the laws. We shall not listen to the words of the king, or we should transgress against our religion, the right or to the left. And when he finished this, and this, I don't know if this is legend or fact, but here's how it comes down. A Jewish man comes forward in the sight of all to offer sacrifice on the altar in Modin in accordance with the king's decree. And Mattathias sees this, and he is filled with zeal and rage and anger, all of which are appropriate, of course, right? And he ran up and he killed him on the altar. And he also killed the king's official in charge of enforcing sacrifices, and he destroyed the altar. He acted zealously for the sake of the Torah as Pinchas acted against Zimri ben Salu, right? Y'all remember the story of Pinchas? Zimri is fornicating on the altar with a Midianite woman. And Pinchas goes up and, spears the two of them together. The end, right? So, and there is there are different positions about, whether what Pinchas did was really good or necessary. But here it says, what Mattathias did was absolutely right. That's the position of First Maccabees. Okay. Yes, Daniel.
So in this case, Mattathias is acting to sustain and protect the law, but when it comes to fighting on Shabbat, he wants to change it. So he's not opposed to change, but he's also not opposed to ignoring the law.
Exactly. He doesn't want the law to be ignored. What
Right.
he's doing is,
But he's not very
upholding the law by being willing to make an exception to one part of it.
Yeah, okay, well, another way of saying that though is he's a little inconsistent.
So, I would say it's inconsistent by necessity. Okay?
Yeah, I got it. Okay, I got you. Thank you.
Yes, you did. You are the one who said that first, right? Okay. Here is the portion from 2nd Maccabees. Right? So one of the leading sages was Eliezer, a very handsome man now of advanced age. Repeatedly, they tried to force him to open his mouth and eat pork. He, however, preferred death with glory to life with defilement. And he spat, as one should, when standing fast to resist the temptation, to let love of life bring him to taste what religion forbids. And of his own free will, he began to march to the whipping drum. The meat was part of a sacrifice, and to eat it was a violation of the Torah. The men appointed to compel him to do so had known Eliezer for many years. They took him aside and in secret urged him to fetch meat that he was permitted to eat, prepared by himself, and to pretend that he was eating the meat from the sacrifice as ordered by the king. For in so doing, he would escape death and would receive from them the kindness due an old friend. Eliezer came to a lofty resolution, one worthy of his years, of the authority of old age, of his conspicuous, well-earned white hair, and of his way of life, which had been exemplary from childhood. More important, it was worthy of the sacred legislation established by God. He showed himself consistent. He told him to send him off to the netherworld without delay. He said, such pretense is unworthy of my advanced age. My pretense, for the sake of a brief transitory span of life, would cause many of the younger generations to think that Eliezer at the age of 90 had gone over to the Gentile way of life, and so they too would go astray because of me. And I would earn the defilement and besmirching of my old age. Therefore, if I now bravely give up my life, I shall show myself worthy of my old age, as I leave to the young a noble example of how to go eagerly and nobly to die a beautiful death in the defense of our revered and sacred laws. As he was about to expire under the lashing, he groaned forth, the Lord who possesses sacred knowledge perceives that, though able to escape death in my body, I submit to cruel torment under the lash, and that yet in my soul I am glad to suffer it out of reverence for him. So he died, leaving his death as an example of nobility and as a precedent of valor, to be remembered not only by the young, but by the multitudes of his nation. Right? So, this is, the act of a loyalist. Right? Now, one of the results of this that we see later on in the development of Jewish law is that there are certain things that would be permitted. In other words, you could permit a violation of Jewish law to save one's life with certain exceptions. And one of those exceptions is if you were asked to do something against the law in public, as Eliezer was being told to do. And Eliezer understands the stakes in that. He understands that people will misread what he has done, and they will say, well, I guess it's okay. So he says, publicly, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay? So that's the argument that he gives. And that lives on in the texts of the rabbis. Right? Also, Eliezer has several audiences. Right? He has, those who are going to torture him. There's God, and there's his fellow Jews. Hmm? So what is he, what is he saying to each of them? What is he saying? I mean, it's pretty clear what he's saying to the other Jews, right? He's saying, don't do this, right? What is he saying to those who kill him?
I'm not going to do it. That I
Says,
stand by my values.
yeah, I stand by my values, and others and others will too. And you will not succeed. Right? Yes, Liz.
So with the Jews, I mean, the conversos, they were forced, some chose to convert and publicly look as though they're Catholic, Christian,
Yes.
but then in hiding, continue to practice their Jewish customs.
Yes.
But they're doing exactly what Eliezer has said not to do.
Yes. So, obviously under oppression, there are difficult choices people had to make. Obviously the rabbis would have said, don't make that choice. Hmm? Yes, Ron.
When you were reading this passage, something popped up immediately in my mind, and it reminded me very much of the Muslims who died for martyrdom. That they have a cause that they truly believe in, and they're willing to give up their life for that cause.
You mean like suicide bombers and the 911?
Right.
So not Muslims necessarily, but Islamists.
Islamists. This is what this reminded me of.
Yes.
He was willing to give up his life for, I don't want to use the word cause, but his beliefs. And you can say the
But
same.
of course, the difference with Islamists is Eliezer wasn't about to kill somebody else.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. It was just his own life.
Yes. And ultimately, that's all he says he can control, along with, how everyone else will read his actions and respond.
And so taking this a step further, people that were in concentration camps, that were observant Jews, how were they able to keep the Shabbat, to keep the dietary laws, etc.? How did they accomplish that?
In many cases, it was simply through reciting the prayers, or some people would save a crust of bread, for their Shabbat challah, right? And then, they'd go out to work in the morning because that's what they had to do. They were slaves.
Correct.
Right? So, obviously they, but there were many Jews who in the concentration camps struggled to observe Shabbat and the festivals as best they could.
And when it comes, I mean, the food they were given obviously was not kosher, but in order to sustain yourself, you would have to eat it.
Yes. Yes.
So
Okay, we are out of time. We'll continue this and do the rest of this unit next week. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Those of you in our second class,
Thank you.
we'll be back in about 5. Thank you, Jennifer. See you all later.